Montana Territory, July 1872. The buzzards were already circling when Nolan Zayne spotted the smoke. He pulled his horse to a stop on the ridge, the wind brushing the brim of his hat, and narrowed his eyes. The fire below was not from a camp. It was the wrong color, thicker, darker. A burning wagon. He kicked his boots into the sides of his mare and took off downhill. By the time Nolan reached the clearing, the fire had mostly died. The wreck of the wagon still smoldered, its iron parts twisted and charred. He dismounted slowly, hand on his holster, eyes sweeping for movement. The ground was scattered with broken crates, torn cloth, and a single bloodied bonnet lying limp in the grass. And then he heard a whimper, soft and hoarse, from beneath the overturned wagon bed. Nolan dropped to his knees and peered under. Two wide-eyed children stared back at him. The boy looked about 6, his face streaked with soot and tears, his shirt torn at the sleeve. The girl was younger, maybe 4, clutching a cracked doll with one leg missing. They both looked like they had not moved in hours. "Hey," Nolan said gently, lowering his voice. "It's all right now. You are safe." The boy's lip trembled. "Mama told us to stay under here. She said she would come back." Nolan's throat tightened. He looked around again, but there was no sign of a grown woman, just the silence of the pines and the fire's fading hiss. He extended a hand. "Come on out. I will get you somewhere safe." The little girl crawled out first, then the boy followed, stiff and slow. Nolan lifted them both onto his horse like they weighed nothing, then climbed up behind them. "I do not know your names," he said, adjusting his hold on the reins. "I am Owen," the boy said, voice small. "She is Olive." Nolan nodded. "All right, Owen, Olive, I am Nolan, and until we figure out what comes next, I will be the man they call Pa." Owen blinked up at him. "Are you sure?" Nolan looked down at the boy, his heart tugging in a way he had not felt in years. "Yeah, I am sure." He turned the horse toward the nearest town, Rosebend, 15 miles east, and rode. Hattie Fairgrove had just finished folding laundry when she heard the hoofbeats out front. She stepped out onto the porch, shading her eyes against the late sun, and saw a man riding in with 2 children clinging to him. He looked rough dust in his hair, a day's worth of grit on his coat, but his arms were steady around the children. Hattie walked down the porch steps as he stopped. The little girl was asleep against his chest. The boy stared at her like he did not know whether to trust her or not. "We need help," the man said. She met his eyes, dark, steady, tired. "What happened?" "Wagon was burned, found them under it. No sign of their mother. Or anyone else." Hattie looked at the children, her heart twisted. She had worked as the town's schoolteacher for 6 years, seen her share of hard stories, but this was different, this was fresh. Raw. "Bring them inside," she said. Nolan followed her into the house, careful not to wake the girl. He laid her gently on the settee while Hattie fetched water and bread. Owen sat stiffly at her kitchen table, eyes darting around like he might bolt any second. "What is your name?" she asked the man. "Nolan Zayne. Cowboy. I work out of 3 Pines Ranch west of here. I am Hattie Fairgrove." He nodded once, respectful. "Appreciate you tacking us in." Hattie looked at the children again. "They have nobody, not that I saw, just them, and fire." She poured water for the boy and sat across from him. "You like honey in your tea?" Owen shrugged. "Mama did." Hattie's breath caught. She glanced at Nolan, who gave her a slow nod. She fixed the tea anyway, setting it gently in front of the boy. Then she sat back down. "You planning to keep them?" she asked Nolan quietly. "I cannot leave them," he said. "Not now." She studied him. His voice was steady, but she could see it in his eyes. He was carrying something heavy, not just the children, something older, deeper. "You know what that means, right?" she said. "Folks will talk." "I do not care." Their eyes held. That night the children slept in Hattie's guest room, curled together under a quilt. Nolan made up a bedroll on the floor of her parlor, though she offered him the barn. He had shaken his head. I would rather be inside, in case they wake. Hattie stood in the doorway, arms crossed. You are not like most cowboys I have met, she said. Nolan looked up from where he was unrolling the blanket. That good or bad, just different. She turned to go, but he said quiet, You got family? I did. Parents passed when I was 18, no siblings, never married. Nolan nodded. Same, she looked back at him. Why are you doing this? You could have ridden on. I do not know, he admitted, just saw them, and I knew I could not ride away. Hattie's voice softened. That is something. He looked up at her again, longer this time. So is what you are doing. She gave a small smile and turned back toward her bedroom. 2 days passed. Then 4. Owen began to open up. He followed Nolan around the yard, asked questions about horses, about rope. Nolan showed him how to hold a lasso, how to oil a saddle. Olive clung to Hattie, her small hand always curled around Hattie's skirt. She rarely spoke, but her eyes began to lose that hollow look. One evening, after supper, Nolan stood with Hattie on the porch. The sky had turned orange over the mountains. The children were inside, playing with carved animals Nolan had whittled. You think they will be all right? Hattie asked. I think they will if we do this right. She looked over at him. You really mean to stay with them? I do. They need someone. And I want to be that someone. Hattie nodded, quiet. You think I am out of my depth? He asked. No, she said. I think you are just getting started. He smiled faintly, then turned to her. Do you ever think about having a family? She hesitated. Sometimes. I stopped hoping a few years back. Why? Life does not always make space for women like me. Well, he said, voice low, maybe life is about to. She looked up at him, surprised. He held her gaze. You already feel like part of this. You and the kids, it feels right. Her breath caught. Nolan, I am not rushing you, he said. Just think about it. She nodded slowly. I will. And she did. That night, as she lay in bed listening to Olive's soft breathing from the next room, Hattie Fairgrove thought about Nolan Zayne. About the way he had said he would be the man they called Pa. And how, somehow, she wanted to be the woman they called Ma. By the second week, the rhythm of their days had begun to hold shape. Morning started early, with Hattie kneading bread while Nolan fed the stock behind the schoolhouse. Owen helped where he could, careful with the lanterns and proud when Nolan let him lead the mule out to water. Olive, still quiet, had taken to brushing the old calico cat that came and went from the porch, her small hands steady as she worked the knots from its fur. The school term was out for summer, and the building stood silent beside the house, its whitewashed siding sun-bleached, its bell long since rusted into stillness. Hattie had cleared one of the back rooms to keep the children's few belongings, and Nolan had begun building a cot from scrap pine. One afternoon, after the sun had passed its peak, and the air grew thick with the scent of sage and dust, Hattie stepped out to find Nolan on one knee beside Owen, showing him how to sharpen a blade against a whetstone. You've got to feel the angle, Nolan said, pressing the boy's hand gently. Let the steel talk to you. Does it talk back? Owen asked, not with words, but you'll know when it's right. Hattie leaned against the post, arms folded. You're good with him. Nolan didn't look up. He listens. That's rare. She stepped down into the yard, watching the boy's careful strokes. He wants to be useful. I can see it in the way he looks at you. Nolan wiped the blade on a cloth and handed it to Owen. Go try it on that apple from earlier. See how clean it slices. The boy ran off toward the porch and Nolan stood, brushing his palms on his trousers. You ever think about sending for someone from your past? Hattie asked. Family, friends. He shook his head. No one left to write to. And if there was, I wouldn't want to pull them into this. This, she asked. He looked toward the edge of the property where the land sloped down into brush and rock. "It's not just the children, it's what happened out there. Someone burned that wagon, not by accident." Hattie's breath caught. "I didn't say anything before," he continued, "but I found tracks, shod horses, at least 3. They came from the east, then turned south." "Outlaws?" she asked. Could be worse." "You think they'll come back? They didn't take anything. Just left them there." "That's what bothers me." She stepped closer. "What do you plan to do? For now, keep low, keep things quiet. If they were watching, maybe they'll lose interest. And after that," he met her gaze, "depends on what kind of life we're trying to build here." She didn't answer right away. The wind stirred her skirt, and somewhere nearby, a cricket started early. "I've been in Rosebend 6 years," she said finally. "Never had anyone to think about beside myself. I'm not sure I know how to build a life with someone else in it. You don't have to know. Just have to want it." He said it plain, without pressure, and it sat between them like something warm and real. That evening, after supper, they sat on the back stoop watching the children gather stones beneath the cottonwood tree. Olive had begun humming a low, tuneless murmur, and Owen kept pointing out ones shaped like birds or boots. "You pick a favorite yet?" Hattie asked Nolan. He raised an eyebrow. "Between the two?" "No, the stones," he chuckled, the sound low and rough. "That one, I think," he said, nodding toward a flat gray one Owen was brushing clean. "Looks like a saddle horn." She turned her head to him. "You know, I never expected any of this. Not you, not them." "Same," he murmured. She hesitated. "I used to think I'd end up alone." He didn't look away. "You're not." The children came running then, arms full of rocks, and the moment passed. But something had settled. Not rushed, not spoken outright, but firm as roots growing just below the surface. Later, after the children had gone to sleep and the lantern had been turned low, Hattie stepped softly into the parlor, where Nolan sat tying a strip of leather into a loop. "I've been thinking," she said. He looked up. "If you're staying, and I think you are, then maybe we ought to plan." "Plan what?" "Where they'll sleep come winter. What to do if one of them gets sick. How to keep this going once school starts up again." He nodded slowly. "That's a lot." "It is," she agreed. "But I'd rather face too much with someone than not enough on my own." He stood, setting the leather aside. "Then we'll plan, together." And just like that, the room felt less like a place to pass through and more like something being built, piece by piece. Outside, the wind shifted. Somewhere up in the hills, a coyote called long and low. But inside the house, all was still. The 3rd week brought the first real rain. It began at dusk, slow and deliberate, tapping against the porch roof as if testing its strength. Hattie stood in the doorway with Olive perched on her hip, both watching the drops turn the yard to mud. Nolan came in from the lean-to, his coat soaked through, and his hat dark with water. He lifted it off and shook out his hair, the damp strands curling slightly at the ends. "Storm's settling in," he said, setting the saddle blanket by the hearth to dry. "It'll be here all night," Hattie replied, shifting Olive's weight as the little girl yawned against her shoulder. "You might want to bring in anything that'll rot." Already did. He crouched by the fire, feeding it another log. "Your chimney draws better than most I've known. It was rebuilt after the last one cracked, clay from the riverbank. My father taught me how to mix it." Olive had fallen asleep, her head tucked beneath Hattie's collar. She carried her back to the bedroom, tucking her beside Owen without waking either of them. When she returned, Nolan had poured them each a tin cup of coffee, the pot resting on the stove's back corner. He handed hers over without a word, and they sat across from one another at the table, the quiet broken only by the sound of rain ticking against the window panes. "Did you always ride alone?" she asked. "I did." "Any reason?" He watched the steam curl from his cup. "I was 17 when I left Texas. My brother stayed behind. Married a girl from the next township, started a farm. I told myself I'd send for him once I had enough land to share, but that never came. Then I heard he passed. Fever took him and the baby. His wife left soon after. Hattie rested her fingers on the rim of her cup. You never went back. There was nothing left to go back to. The fire cracked, a single soft pop. I was engaged once, she said, eyes steady on the table's grain, to a blacksmith from Helena. He had a kind laugh and a fondness for dried cherries. But he wanted a wife who'd leave the classroom behind, said no children should be raised by a woman with ink on her hands. Nolan looked at her then, his expression unreadable. You didn't marry him. I didn't. Good. She met his gaze. The silence between them had changed, no longer unsure, but waiting. A kind of breath held between two people who'd spent too many years swallowing their own. You planning to stay put here? She asked. With the children. With us. He didn't hesitate. If you'll have me. The wind pressed against the eaves. Somewhere in the distance, a tree branch let go and fell heavy to the earth. I never pictured myself sharing this house, she said. I built it to fit one. I don't need much space, but you'll need a place of your own in time. If we intend to make this last. He nodded slowly. I've got savings, enough to build. I could raise a cabin within the month if the weather holds. I've got lumber behind the schoolhouse. Been saving it for repairs. I'll use it. The rain deepened, steady now, like a drumbeat under the floorboards. She rose and crossed to the cupboard, pulling down a folded map and setting it between them. This acre here, she said, pointing near the edge of her land. It's dry, shaded, and close enough to the creek. You could build there. Nolan leaned in, his arm brushing hers. That close. If you're going to raise children with me, I expect you within shouting distance. He smiled just once, and not as a man trying to charm. It was quiet and full, like something he hadn't let out in years. I'll start clearing it tomorrow. She rolled the map back up and looked at him. I want what's good for them. That's the only kind of future I'm willing to build. So do I. She didn't look away. And I don't want to raise them beside someone I'm not willing to share more than chores with. Nolan's hand found hers across the table. Then we'll share it. All of it. Her fingers curled into his, warm and sure. Rain still fell, but slower now, as if satisfied. The hearth glowed low, casting long shadows across the walls. They sat there a while longer, neither speaking. There was no need. The children slept, the house held steady, and the storm passed safely overhead. In the morning, the ground would be soft enough for digging. By the fourth week, the land had hardened again under the sun, the earth packed dry with fine cracks running through it. Nolan stood at the edge of the acre Hattie had pointed to, sleeves rolled, axe in hand, shirt clinging to his back. The cottonwoods here grew lean and tall, and the first few had already been felled and stripped, their trunks laid out in a neat row like promise waiting to be shaped. Owen sat nearby with a small draw-knife, scraping bark from a length of pine while Olive arranged smooth stones in a ring around what would become the new hearth. Nolan kept one eye on them as he worked, the steady rhythm of wood splitting under his swing a kind of reassurance. Hattie arrived from town with a basket looped over her arm, her hair pinned up against the heat. She walked the path between the trees without calling out, stopping when she reached the clearing's edge. Brought beans, smoked pork, and cornbread, she said. You've been out here since dawn. He leaned the axe against a stump and wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. Didn't notice the time. You didn't eat breakfast either. I wasn't hungry then. You are now, she said, setting the basket down. The children came running at the word food, and Hattie laid out a cloth beneath the shade of a nearby juniper. Nolan sat last, his knees stiff but his expression easier than it had been at sunup. Hattie passed him a tin plate. You're building it fast. Cabin won't raise itself, he said. I want the roof on before the first cold snap. She reached for a slice of cornbread. You always move this quick when you make up your mind, only when it's worth it. He said it without looking at her, but she felt it just the same. Owen chewed in silence, then looked up. Will we help build the chimney? You will, Nolan said. But not until I've got the walls standing. I'll teach you to lay stone steady so the smoke goes where it's meant to. Olive studied him, then pointed at the ring she'd been building. That's the fireplace. He gave a quiet nod. Good start. Hattie leaned back on her hands, watching them. They've never had a place that was theirs before, not really. They will now. She looked down at her lap. I've been thinking about something. Nolan waited. There's land west of the ridge. Belonged to a miner who passed last year. No kin. The town's holding it in lien for unpaid taxes, but it's good soil. Could be turned. Nolan chewed slowly. You thinking we put down more than a cabin? I'm thinking we could plant. Barley maybe, potatoes. Something we could grow into. He took a long breath. I haven't farmed since I was a boy. You don't forget the rhythm of it. He looked at her then, not uncertain, just quiet. You sure? She nodded once. I want to give them roots. And it wouldn't be bad, having something to tend besides lessons. You're talking about a future. I am. He reached for her hand where it rested near the basket. Then I'm with you. They didn't move, didn't pull away. Owen and Olive had taken to stacking stones beside the fire ring again, their voices low and absorbed in their own small world. The sun filtered through the branches above and painted the clearing in long strokes of gold. Later, as the children napped beneath a blanket strung between trunks, Nolan returned to the cabin's frame while Hattie measured the distance between the posts, her chalk marking each beam with careful precision. I was wrong, she said, her voice thoughtful. I used to think a life was something you built on your own, and maybe that was the safest way to keep it from falling apart. He set the beam down. And now I think safety isn't the same as peace. I never had the second. Not really. He stepped beside her, his palm brushing her back, warm and certain. You do now. She didn't answer, only looked up at him with something settled in her eyes, not hope. That had come and gone before. This was steadier. Trust, earned moment by moment. The sun dipped low, and the shadows stretched across the clearing. The cabin's bones stood upright now, rough but true, the beginning of something that would hold against wind and time. Hattie stood with Nolan as the evening came, their shoulders touching lightly, unspoken things moving between them like breath. Behind them, two children slept beneath the trees, safe and still. And in the clearing, what had started with a vow and a horse was becoming home. The first frost came early that year, dusting the grass with silver and hardening the creek's edge to a delicate crust. Nolan rose before the sun to stack the last of the cordwood against the cabin's north wall. The roof was on, the windows framed and glazed with the help of an old glazier from town. Hattie had sewn curtains from muslin, and Olive had picked dried yarrow to tuck into the sills. It wasn't finished, not fully, but it was theirs. At breakfast, Owen traced lines in the steam rising from his porridge. Will we sleep there tonight? Hattie glanced at Nolan. If you want to, Nolan said. It's warm enough now. Olive looked up from her spoon. Will Ma come too? Nolan didn't answer. He waited. Hattie reached across the table and smoothed Olive's hair. Yes, we'll all go. They moved in by midday. Hattie helped the children unpack the few belongings. They'd gathered a rag doll, a wooden horse, some folded clothes. Nolan unrolled the quilts she'd made over the summer and laid them across the straw-stuffed mattresses he'd built by hand. The hearth caught on the first strike, and the room filled with the scent of cedar smoke and dry pine. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep curled together beneath one blanket, Nolan stepped outside. The sky was clear, stars strung low and full across the black. He stood with his arms folded, listening to the wind stir the dry grass. Hattie joined him a moment later, her shawl drawn tight. "They settled in faster than I thought. They trust you. They trust you too." He looked down at her. "You sure about this?" "I am." He hesitated. "I've been thinking about what comes next." She raised an eyebrow. "You already built a home and planted barley. What else is left?" "A name." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a narrow ring of gold. It was plain, worn smooth at the edges, the kind a man might carry for years without saying why. "My mother gave me this before I left Texas. Said it belonged to her mother before her. I've kept it in my kit ever since." Hattie watched him without moving. "I never knew what I was saving it for." Not until now. He didn't kneel. He only stood steady and held it out on his calloused palm. "I want to raise them with you. I want to grow old with you. I don't need anything fancy, just your word." She looked from the ring to his face. "I've spent years keeping to myself," she said. "But you've made room in my life I didn't know was missing. And I don't ever want to go back to the way it was before." She took the ring and slid it on. Nolan let out a quiet breath, then reached for her hand and held it. They stayed like that for a while, shoulder to shoulder beneath the sky, the warmth of the cabin behind them and the steady hush of wind all around. The wedding was held 2 weeks later in the schoolhouse. Hattie wore a dress she'd sewn herself, dove gray with a ribbon of blue at the waist. Nolan wore his cleanest trousers and the vest she'd mended for him. The children stood at the front beside them, Owen with a straight back and polished boots, Olive in a dress of calico dotted with tiny flowers. The town gathered close, ranchers, storekeepers, the old glazier, even the sheriff. No one questioned it. Folks had seen the way Nolan looked at Hattie, the way she reached for his hand without thinking, how the children leaned into them both like roots seeking solid ground. Afterward, there was music and pie and small, careful dancing on the schoolhouse floor. That night in the cabin, Hattie set her comb on the dresser and turned to find Nolan watching her from the doorway. There was no need for words. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her, and she leaned into him like she'd always been meant to. Years passed. The barley took well. The soil proved rich, and by the second harvest, they had enough to trade for a second mule and a new plow. Hattie returned to teaching when the term resumed, her days full of chalk and questions. Nolan worked the land with Owen at his side, the boy taller every spring, his hands learning the weight of tools and the rhythm of weather. Olive grew quieter still, but her eyes missed nothing. She took to drawing charcoal sketches of birds, of the cat that still drifted in and out, of the three of them standing beneath the cottonwood tree. In the evenings, they read by firelight. Nolan's voice low and steady, Hattie's hand resting on his knee. Sometimes, when the wind rose, they'd sit side by side, saying nothing, letting the silence stretch easy between them. No more strangers rode past. No more burnt wagons. The past remained where it belonged behind them, buried by time and kindness and the slow, careful building of something better. One spring morning, as the sun broke over the ridge and the creek ran clear and cold beneath the thaw, Hattie stepped out onto the porch with a newborn swaddled to her chest. Nolan followed, his hand resting gently at her back. Owen stood in the yard, taller now, shoulders squared. Olive sat cross-legged by the fence, watching a butterfly land on her sketchbook. The cabin stood firm behind them, smoke rising from its chimney, the barley fields just beginning to green. Nolan looked at Hattie and smiled, not wide, not loud, but full of everything that mattered. She smiled back. And there, Surrounded by the life they'd built from ash and sorrow and something stubbornly tender, they began again, together. Always.